This is more people than we usually have at the store at any one time. Thank you all for being here for this event. I'm just curious, we always introduce the space, but who's been to Word Up before, or who's not been to Word Up before? Some people. Yeah. So welcome. We opened as a pop-up shop in 2011, Broadway and 176th Street. And it was a raw, empty storefront. We were meant to be a one-month-long project at the time, with free space thanks to collaboration between a local art service organization and a real estate company that had to do some good deeds. Right from the moment we opened, people asked if we could stay forever. Because of the unusual conditions under which we opened, it was space where anyone could gather without the pressure of commerce. Neighbors started to pressure local politicians, pressured the landlord, and we got extensions month to month, and we were able to stay in that space well beyond that first month, so over a year. 6 months of that rent-free on Broadway, selling or giving away books and hosting daily events for all ages. At our 1-year mark, we celebrated with our birthday with Juno Diaz. It was a great talk by Juno Diaz, and it was a real high for us. But then a month later, a new landlord gave us notice. That was like 3 landlords ago from that space. By the time we closed there, we'd been in that space for a little over a year, and over the next year, we put everything into storage as we looked for a new space. We did an Indiegogo campaign and raised $60,000 online, another 10 offline from more than 800 individual funders, a lot from, mostly from the neighborhood. And we opened up this space in the summer of 2013, still staffed by volunteers from all corners of uptown neighborhoods, and 60 of us at any given time. And we're still hosting events every day, such as this one. If you want to join as a volunteer, or if you ever want to use the space for your own event, or just come to whatever we have going on daily, then please stay in touch or sign our mailing list. There's one thing that I want to point out about that introduction to Word Up that I tell at every event, and in light of tonight's event. All the storefronts that I looked at the time, I'm Veronica, I'm the founder of the original space, Veronica. So it was about half a dozen storefronts on Broadway in the 170s. All of them are still empty today, except for the one that we'd occupied since May 2011. And yet a week doesn't go by when we get a call or email here at Word Up to all of our email addresses about someone needing space for something that we can't quite accommodate for whatever reason, because we don't have the staffing or enough space or enough simultaneous space. It also feels like we can't go a week without hearing about a restaurant potentially closing or a fire displacing both residents and small businesses. And this tension between the overcrowded and the empty is more stark than ever. I'm excited and honored to be hosting this event at Word Up in support of Jeremiah Moss's book, Vanishing New York, How a Great City Lost Its Soul. I hope that if you haven't read it already, that you will buy it today and read it. Besides all of the actual factual knowledge within, if you love New York, it's like candy reading it. There's so many evocative scenes of New York, what's there, that you remember, and that you live day to day, but it's getting harder to find as easily and as ubiquitously. I'm not gonna lie, the book broke my heart with every chapter turn. And I maybe cried at the end of the Times Square chapter. Another reason for you to read this book now is I was kind of pleased at the end to find that there wasn't a chapter already about our neighborhood. It's missing. I think that's a promising sign. And that we weren't already in this book. And I think there are a lot of ways that we can all try and keep us out of this book about vanishing New York. Some of which I'm sure Jeremiah will discuss, but also we at Word Up wanted someone who's been organizing up here for a long time to help turn out this discussion to see what we as uptown citizens can do. Claudia de la Cruz has been engaging in popular education and community organizing with working class communities of color, women, immigrants, and youth in Washington Heights, Harlem, and the South Bronx. She will be in conversation with Jeremiah tonight. From her work dedicated to the leadership development process of young women with the Urban Butterflies, her ministry work as Reverend of San Romero de las Americas, Her contributions to the political education processes at the Rebeldias Arts Collective, and her work as co-host and producer of Telesur English's And You Don't Stop web show along with hip-hop duo Rebeldias, Claudia has reaffirmed time and time again her commitment to be part of the movement that will deconstruct systems of oppression and exploitation that will dare to have a radical imagination for the future and build a better world in the now. Currently, she's co-chair of the Popular Education Project, a national collective of organizers and popular educators coming from different social movements in the United States. She's also a member of the National Steering Committee for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, seeking to shift the national narrative around the poor and poverty, as well as create a nonpartisan and unified social movement to impact the socioeconomic and political reality of the poor in the United States. Very honored also to have Claudia here to bring this conversation forward. But back to Jeremiah, whose blog I'm sure many of you have followed. This book, before it was a book, started as a blog, Jeremiah's Vanishing New York, a blog that Village Voice, rest in peace, the print edition of Village Voice. No one takes stock of New York's changes with the same mixture of stark sorrow, poeticism, and lyric wit as Jeremiah Moss. It's true. It's a great book to read, and I hope that you will get this book. Hopefully you'll support your local bookshop and get it here. I believe Coogan's is also providing coupons for people if you come to this event and buy the book. And you may have heard the recent stuff with Coogan's that has thankfully been saved from closing. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to just let Jeremiah take over.
So I'm going to talk for like about 5 minutes and then read for maybe like 10, and then Claudia and I are going to talk, and then we're all going to talk. So that's what's going to happen. I'm going to read from my chapter on what I call hypergentrification, but before I do that, I want to kind of give a speed round 5 minute 100-year history. Probably not a good idea to try to cram 100 years into 5 minutes, but I'm going to do that because a lot of times when people talk about gentrification, particularly people who are supportive of what gets called revitalization, right, that word, the history of the underpinnings, the racist, classist underpinnings often get erased. So I want to just kind of run through that. Many of you may be familiar with this history, many of you may not be, but I want us all to kind of have it in our consciousness as we talk tonight. So, going back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? So we've got this influx of immigrants coming to New York, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, largely Italians, Jewish people. We also have African Americans coming up in the early 1900s, the Great Migration from the Jim Crow South. And a lot of these folks are coming in to work industrial jobs. And New York City was an industrial city. By 1920 or so, the city planners, the elites of the city, and the bankers decide that they're going to start to deindustrialize New York City. And this is one of the things there are a lot of pieces of this story, and this is one of them, that gets repeated as this was natural, right? So when we talk about deindustrialization, you hear, oh, it just kind of happened. Well, it didn't just happen, and a lot of this stuff didn't just happen. It was planned. And it was planned to take the land from industry, but also I think it's not a stretch to imagine that these people in power wanted to create tension between the races in the working class, right? And the way to do that was to reduce jobs, because people fight over resources. So that's a great way to get people to hate each other. Okay, that's the 1920s. 1934, we have redlining, right? Redlining, the federal government comes in, Federal Housing Administration, and they make these maps of risk of cities all across America, and on those maps, they're color-coded. And the neighborhoods that get painted red are the highest risk. And what makes a neighborhood high risk? African Americans, Italians, and Jews. Italians and Jews were not considered white at that time. They were considered sort of like almost white, but not quite. At the same time, the federal government starts to create these suburbs, and they offer low-interest loans to white people and the almost white people to go move to the suburbs. So these loans basically meant that you could buy a house cheaper than you could rent an apartment in New York City. So why not? Because of redlining, there's this disinvestment in these redline neighborhoods, right? So you can't get a loan, you can't get a loan for a small business, you can't get a loan to buy a property, to rehab a property, and so the decline is beginning. And this is, again, not natural, right? The decline of these neighborhoods was planned and constructed. So these low-interest loans in the suburbs are not available to African Americans, and even if you are African American and you have the money to buy a house on your own, you're still not going to be able to buy a house because these suburbs have whites-only covenants, right? So now you have African American people trapped in these redlined neighborhoods. And you have a choice. You can stay there or you can move back to the Jim Crow South and deal with the violence there. So you're going to stay in the city, most likely. So this is this process that's starting to take shape, right? So then 1949 comes along. This is the lightning round, right? So in 1949, federal government again comes in with another policy called Slum Clearance, right? So in New York City, we had Robert Moses was the guy in charge of this. And this meant that black and increasingly brown neighborhoods now in the 1950s get bulldozed. So using eminent domain to take property from people, evicting thousands and thousands of people. Some people were evicted from their homes more than once, twice, 3 times. This is trauma. There's a great book by a psychiatrist named Mindy Thompson-Fullilove called Root Shock, and she really examines what happens to people during what was called urban renewal, slum clearance, the trauma of being uprooted again and again, and losing your community, losing your social network. So now you have traumatized people who are then either pushed into housing projects or into neighborhoods like Harlem and Bed-Stuy, overcrowding, moving in with family members, families doubling up, tripling up. And you have the 1960s, the civil rights movement gets more intense, and what get called race riots, all of them started with an act of police brutality, most of them with protests against that. And you have the continuation of white flight. So you have a crime spike, you have a spike in drug use. This is what oftentimes traumatized people turn to cope and to survive. And you have the 1970s, right? Which gets labeled as the bad old days of New York City. You've got the fiscal crisis. And the government has 2 responses. The federal government has a response of what they called benign neglect. I mean, these names are like, anyway, benign neglect. I don't know how neglect could ever be benign, but that was what the Nixon administration called it. And in New York City, we had something called planned shrinkage. So what City Hall did was basically the idea was if you starve these black and brown neighborhoods, you deny them services, the people will just leave, which is what City Hall wanted to have happen. And so there's a book back there called The Fires, which I recommend on the table. There's a lot of really good books over there. Joe Flood, and there it is. And he talks about this myth of arson, right? Like the South Bronx is burning, and this idea that it was all landlords burning down their buildings so they could get insurance money. Only 7% of the fires were due to arson. Most of them were conventional fires, but the city was not putting any money into fire services going to poor black and brown neighborhoods, and so the city literally burned people, and that was one way to get rid of them. Okay, so now we're up to gentrification, and the book has a bunch of neighborhoods in it, but I also spend a fair amount of time talking about gentrification and hypergentrification. So these days, when most people think about gentrification, they're thinking about an outdated concept. The word, okay, see, I'm 47, and this is happening where I have to, like, do this, and I can't really, so I either can see the book or I can't see you, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go with the book. All right. So the word gentrification was coined by the British sociologist Ruth Glass in the early 1960s. One by one, she wrote, many of the working class quarters of London have been invaded by the middle class upper and lower. The invaders took over modest houses and turned them into elegant, expensive residences while refurbishing larger Victorians that had fallen into disrepair. Once this process of gentrification starts in a district, she said, it goes on rapidly until all or most of the original working-class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the district is changed. In this first definition of gentrification, we find its basic elements. Members of an upper class invade a lower class neighborhood, purchase and upscale the houses, displace the people, and change the character. And I just want to say this piece about displacement, there's a lot, if you read about gentrification, there's a lot of people now saying that gentrification does not displace anybody. And I just want to kind of we need to talk about that. Gentrification is not the simple shifting of one urban population to another. It does not describe, for example, the expansion of Chinese immigrants from Chinatown into Little Italy. One lower income group cannot gentrify another. Gentrification is about class, and the places where class intersects with race and other factors like education and sexual orientation, but it is always about an imbalance of power, and in every scenario, the gentrifiers have more power. Neil Smith, who was a professor of anthropology and geography at CUNY until his death in 2012, outlined what is probably the most detailed and useful theory of gentrification and its changing shape. So he called Ruth Glass's first version of gentrification the first wave or sporadic gentrification. And he dated it from the 1950s to the 1970s, like the mid-1970s. And he referred to this wave as small scale and quaint, without the backing and support of local government and financial institutions. In gentrification's second wave, from the late 70s to 1989, the process anchored itself, becoming an essential part of the city government's master plan to take back the city from the poor, the working class, people of color, homosexuals, artists, socialists, and other undesirables. So a process that had begun organically, more or less, driven by individuals, was now exploited by City Hall for the benefit of corporations and developers. And this momentous shift was largely due to a major political reorientation that I know Claudia and I are going to talk more about. But in short, the fiscal crisis of the 1970s brought a new philosophy of governance to the city. So up until then, the city was governed in the 20th century. It was turning into a democratic socialist government. And this shifted with the fiscal crisis. And it turned into the free market capitalist ideology of neoliberalism, with its focus on privatization, deregulation, fiscal austerity, small government, and the elevation of Wall Street. So all of that cutting back of services, that's very neoliberal. Trump right now with this stuff with the food stamps and that's neoliberalism. So this neoliberalization of the city marked a major departure from the progressive, redistributive New Deal philosophy of what had been the old New York. And it would change the course of gentrification and would eventually lead to Michael Bloomberg and his luxury vision of the city. In the late 70s and 80s under Mayor Ed Koch, City Hall's goal became to recreate New York, making it friendly to big business, tourists, real estate developers, and upscale professionals. In the process, City Hall turned away from its citizens. This is a really important, pivotal moment. CUNY professor David Harvey has called this shift, the shift from managerialism, sort of managing the city in a particular way, to entrepreneurialism. So the city becomes an entrepreneurial city. Basically, the city government changed its main priority from providing services and benefits for its own people to competing with other cities for outside human resources and capital. And in this new competitive city, attracting tourists, newcomers, and corporations was, and still is, really much more important than taking care of New Yorkers, and especially vulnerable New Yorkers. So gentrification was really the big gun in the new competitive city's arsenal. Where early gentrification had been driven by middle-class people looking to move into affordable and diverse areas, now the city brought in big real estate developers and corporations with generous tax abatements and other government subsidies, and those tax abatements, we're still dealing with those. Donald Trump, by the way, became Donald Trump because he got about $800 million in tax abatements and other deals from New York City. Public money for the poor was rerouted to the rich. In 1979, the National Association of Black Social Workers vowed to oppose gentrification in cities across the country, along with austerity measures, since these plans, wrote the Times, aimed at removing poor blacks from inner city areas. And this may have been the first time that gentrification was publicly called a plan and its racist, classist aim clearly spelled out. Evictions skyrocketed along with the numbers of homeless New Yorkers. After the second wave of gentrification, New York slipped into an economic recession from about 1989 to 1993. Property values and rents fell, vacancies went up, real estate investors panicked, and journalists wrote of de-gentrification. And there are all these articles at that time saying gentrification is over, it was this 1980s thing, and it's dead and gone, and it'll never come back. Okay, we know what happened there. Smith called the third wave of gentrification generalized, marking its beginning in 1994, and he didn't give it an end date. In this phase, gentrification moved out from the city center into parts previously untouched, and it meant new restaurants and shopping malls in the central city, brand name office towers alongside brand name museums, tourist destinations of all sorts, cultural complexes, in short, a range of mega developments. Gentrification was no longer sporadic or quaint, and it was certainly not a natural trend. And its supporters all knew that it was coming. In 1995, Peter Salins, a senior fellow at the neoliberal think tank Manhattan Institute, told the Times, eventually practically all of Manhattan, south of the northern edge of Central Park, will be gentrified, all the way down to the Battery, and that includes the Lower East Side. He thought it would take until 2025. It happened a lot faster. Neil Smith stopped writing about gentrification after 2006, and he never put forth a fourth wave to account for the dramatic changes that the city endured under Bloomberg. But a year before his death, I wrote to him and asked him to kind of sum up his ideas about that for me. And he said, the class remake of the city was minor, small scale, and symbolic in the beginning. But today we are seeing a total class retake of the central city. Almost without exception, the new housing, new restaurants, new artistic venues, new entertainment locales, not to mention the new jobs on Wall Street, are all aimed at a social class quite different from those who populated the Lower East Side or the West Side, Harlem, or neighborhood Brooklyn in the 1960s. Bloomberg's rezoning of, at latest count, 104 neighborhoods has been the central weapon in this assault, and rezoning, as you know up here, is a major weapon in this war. So hypergentrification, as I think of it, encapsulates not only the real estate deals, the movement of money, and the displacement of lower-income people and small local businesses. It's the whole Megillah. It's the return of the white flight suburbanites' grandchildren and their appetite for a geography of nowhere, in which monotonous chain stores nullify the streets. It's cupcakes, cronuts, and $100 donuts dipped in 24-karat gold. Yes, that exists in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's the ugly extravaganza of what New York and too many other cities have become. Playgrounds for the ultra nouveau riche, orchestrated by oligarchs in sky-high towers, the streets stripped of character, whitewashed and varnished, until they look like anywhere USA. It's the displacement of the working class and the poor, people of color, artists, and oddballs. And it's the changed psychic climate. Hypergentrification has a character, and it's a sociopathic one. Intelligent, malevolent, and directed, it is shot up with rage and vengeance. Which brings me to one other of Neil Smith's critical points about late-stage gentrification. In 1996, Smith called Giuliani's New York the revanchist city. Revanche is French for revenge. For Smith, the revanchist city in the 1990s expressed a race, class, gender terror felt by middle and ruling class whites. The yuppies had come to retake and remake the bad old city in the 80s, investing in brownstones and condos, developing real estate, and moving in corporations, only to be stranded in a recession with declining property values and a record high murder rate. So when the economy tanked in 1989, they were furious, and they voted for Rudy Giuliani. The rallying cry of the revanchist city, wrote Smith, might well be who lost the city, and on whom is revenge to be exacted. The scapegoats in the Giuliani era were people of color, the poor, the working class, immigrants, feminists, homosexuals, socialists, bohemians. These people had made New York the city it became in the 20th century, open, progressive, diverse, and creative. They had also long been identified as enemies of the more conservative elites. So what are we really talking about when we talk about gentrification in the 21st century? In many ways, the term itself is a diversion. It's the bright green face of Oz that distracts us from the man behind the curtain, the invisible hands pulling all the levers. Those hands belong to the globalized world order of the so-called free market, the neoliberal agenda launched in the late 70s to destroy socioeconomic progressivism. In cities across America and the world, those hands pull the levers on hypergentrification, and there's nothing natural about it. Thank you.
I just want to join in and say thanks to everyone that came out, because there are some long days and chaotic things happening in the world, and so having so many people in this spot always kind of uplifts the morale. So clap for yourselves right now. And thank you, Jeremiah, for coming to Wash Heights.
Thank you.
Which still has a little bit of soul.
It does, yeah.
It does.
Yeah, for now.
For now. We gotta work on that.
Watch out, yeah.
We gotta work on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I'm originally from the South Bronx, and picking up the book and reading it did a lot for me to kind of even find some words, right? So articulate what's happening in the city, what has been happening for a while. I think that it is important for us to be able to have a real assessment of what the problem is in order to be able to evaluate what the problem is, and the fact that you were able to connect gentrification or hypergentrification to neoliberalism hit it for me. And I wanted to know a little bit more, how did you make that connection? I remember being at I think it was a forum that was done in Harlem probably about 10 years ago, and it was a forum that was put on by the Party for Socialism and Liberation in the YMCA, and these folks were talking about policing in relations to gentrification. And it's probably the first time that I heard the interconnection of policing and gentrification and government contracts. And so the more that I've done work traveling and working with communities, the more that I've understood that the process of gentrification and displacement is a global issue, because capitalism is a global monster, right? So if you could talk a little bit about the process that led you to make that connection.
Yeah. Until I started working on the book, I really didn't understand neoliberalism. I didn't really, the word, it's a very confusing word. It's a confusing word particularly for people in the U.S., where liberal means left, right? Europeans have no problem with this word. So, as Noam Chomsky says, neoliberalism is neither new nor liberal. But it's a confusing word, and it's a word that shape-shifts, and it's a word that the people who support it are constantly trying to say, this is not a word, this doesn't exist, this word is a slur. You'll hear them do this. It's really an interesting kind of undermining of language. So what brought me to it was that academics in urbanism had made the connection years ago that the city had been neoliberalized. And it also answered that question for me, like you're saying, it's a global issue. People would say to me, well, why is it happening in New York the same way it's happening in London, the same way it's happening in Barcelona, the same way it's happening, in Berlin and Latin America and all these places? And the answer is neoliberalism, late stage capitalism, or there's so many words for it. So it was really the piece that connected it all, and also answered the question for me, because people would say, well, New York's always changing, how is this different? It's no different. And I would say, but I can feel it's different. I know it's different, but I didn't have the word for it. And that was the word.
And you make connection. I mean, part of my family is Chilean, and you make the connection to what happened in Chile in 1973, in terms of the coup and the Chicago boys, and how an economic plan is developed, understanding that this is design, this by design. It's not just simply happening. The process of gentrification being a forceful process that has been planned many years ago, and it changes as capitalism itself changes. When you say the new form of capitalism, we're talking about neoliberalism. and the modalities that it takes and how it shapes. And another piece that kind of caught my attention was, who are the gentrifiers, right? And thinking about art in relationship to the process of gentrification, and how a lot of the times I've done it myself. Like, I would see an artist that is kind of like jumping on to draw or do paint murals on developers, who are from the hood, that are jumping on that wagon, and you say, well, they're gentrifiers, and kind of like, how does that analysis also reduce that it's a larger project in which they're tools of the gentrifiers? I had a conversation with one of the folks that you mentioned in the book, which is Shailene Rodriguez, and she mentioned, they're taking our space. And so what do you do as an artist when you don't have space? If you work within space and time. And so I thought that resonated a lot with me.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, it makes me think about, right now, tonight, on the Lower East Side in my neighborhood, the Sunshine Cinema was closed by some developers. They're going to tear down this 100-some-year-old building and put up a glassy office tower. And the developers are having a party tonight. They're having a party at the cinema to celebrate this, and they have some young poets performing. And, this is the first time I've seen poets do what is called art washing, right? So a lot of artists, what you're describing about putting murals on these art walls and developers' walls is known as art washing, right? So it gives this temporary sort of, hipness or whatever you want to call it to a place, and the developers can kind of get away with it, and the artists can be complicit, but they also, right? We're a lot of artists are working class. They need the money that the mural is going to pay them. The developer is going to pay them. How do you say no to that? I know Shailene is just like, just say no.
Just say no. Yeah.
Right? So that's a difficult one for a lot of folks. And then what happens is artists really get to become the scapegoats. So we can talk about artists' role and being used and that problem, and how do we deal with the artists and how do artists deal with themselves. But in the blogs and the news stories, that's what sort of drives a lot of the commentary and the energy and the agitation. And then the developers are doing their thing, and nobody's paying attention. So it really
you talk
is.
a little bit about the creativity agenda. Can you talk a little bit?
Is that the Richard Florida stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Richard Florida, he's kind of gone back on some of his ideas, but I think it was the same year that Bloomberg was elected, sort of amazingly. Wrote a book on the rise of the creative class, where he talks about basically the Bohemian Index and the Gay Index. It's sort of just like a score to all of these cool factors that cities need in order to compete with other cities, and it's all based on this competitive city model that cities should be competing with other cities for these outside resources, for the tourists and the corporations and all of that investment. And what that ends up looking like, and it really goes hand in hand with neoliberalism, that the people in power have really found these so creative ways to really get under I'm going to use a collective our defenses. So something like bike lanes, right? I have a bike, I ride in the bike lanes, I like the bike lanes. Bike lanes are an incredible tool to gentrify a neighborhood. And trees, right? Who doesn't like trees? Trees are good, trees are green, they make oxygen, we like trees. But they're another tool that get used. And I think we always have to ask, who is it for? Who is it intended for? Because it may be a good thing, and you can say a bike lane is a good thing, a tree is a good thing, but who is it for? What is the intention behind it? And what is this Trojan horse, and what's going to come in behind it?
I mean, part of the basis of or the defense of the rezoning plans is, well, we're creating affordable housing to solve the housing crisis, but affordable to who? Right? Who is it affordable to?
Yeah.
Right? And at the end of the day, when you look at affordable being $42,000 a year, there's not a lot of us making $42,000 a year, and we could barely live. And so, who is this affordable to? And so,
Exactly.
I think it's important to ask those questions. And so, I know that Jeremiah and myself didn't want to just talk to each other.
Can I say one thing before we do? Because you reminded me, a lot of the language, right? A lot of the work that we have to do is to decode the language that these people use and what. Yeah, but all this stuff, right? and what I'm seeing a lot now as I'm reading is this stuff about we're making neighborhoods more diverse by moving in wealthy white people, and it's amazing. And they use the word diversity. We're diversifying the commercial landscape by moving in chain stores. This is diversity, right?
Yeah.
So it's really.
Yeah, pay attention.
Yeah, you really have to pay attention.
Yeah.
So,
and decode.
Yeah.
So we wanted to open up the space for more of like a community conversation. I know that like I said in the beginning, Washington Heights still has soul, but we are also in the way of a rezoning plan. And I know that a lot of the folks that are sitting here are folks that are also working against gentrification and are trying to figure out ways on how to better collectively understand this so that we can collectively also fight against it. So we're just opening up the space for a conversation. So if folks have any thoughts.
Ken, I feel guilty for saying this, but I'm missing part of a community board meeting to be here, so I'm going to leave a little bit. But one of the questions I always have is thinking about asymmetrical information and kind of ways in which some of these new players, or really they're, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, the folks who are in this conversation leverage information and concentration of information in a way to not empower communities or to not have that kind of insight spread more broadly. And so I wonder a lot about the tools and the ways in which communities themselves can improve communication, or to kind of leverage past practices in order to circumvent what doesn't get shared directly with them. I'm not a huge proponent of technology in some regard because, we go into our own bubbles and a lot of the players in that, I don't want to go down that route. But how can we leverage kind of old school practices or tools to share information at a time when the speed at which that information is occurring is kind of more rapid than it's ever been?
Yeah.
I mean, I also,
that sounds like one for you.
Well, for everyone. I mean, I know I see a lot of faces that are organizers in the space and folks that have been doing a lot of work not only in Washington Heights but in other parts of the city. And I think that, unfortunately, we have depended a lot on social media and different platforms to do our organizing. And I think that there's more work to be done around politically educating people and understanding that politics is not only about electoral politics, that is about building people power. And if we are unable to talk to the people that own the bodega, right? I mean, we buy coffee from them every morning. I mean, I know I do because I'm a coffee addict, and probably more than one cup. And if you don't know the person's name and you cannot relate to that person in the sense of well, the person next to you is closing up because there's this process of gentrification, and next 2 days you might be closing too. That type of organizing is what's needed. I did a lot of organizing. I'm 37. I still don't have to do this, but I'm gonna get there. It's coming. And I started doing organizing when I was about 13 years old in the communities of West Harlem and Washington Heights. And I'll tell you, a lot of the door-to-door knocking, a lot of the personal conversation has gone to, excuse my French, shit. People don't talk to each other. And that's the most basic way of educating. And not only to educate people, but to be educated as well. And so I think that, we need to go back to a lot of the practices of organizing that we've felt that we don't need to do anymore because we could reach a global platform and reach hundreds and thousands of people, but the impact is not as raw and as real as it was before. And so there needs to be some, and that's not to say to the millennials in the room. I'm not a millennial. I mean, social media has its importance, but it should be a balance of both. We cannot just become armchair revolutionaries and kind of redeem ourselves every time we denounce something and then go to sleep and think that we've changed the world. That's not how changes happen.
Absolutely, and also I tell people to talk, like, just like we're saying, talk about this stuff, but talk about it really honestly. When you hear people say, and this, it drives me crazy, New York's always changing, something closes, and you hear somebody say that, say to them, hold up a second, let me talk to you about that. Oh, because we can just do that in casual conversation with friends, family, co-workers. That can happen in everyday encounters.
I think like what you're saying, shifting the narrative.
Yeah.
But shifting the narrative means studying. It means going beyond like what we look at online, because that's another thing. Like, we could go online and look for things, but the information that we get is limited, and it does have a skewed political vision and agenda, right? So if we don't know where to look, it's always difficult to get the complete thing. And I mean, that's why I was so excited about the whole aspect of neoliberalism being in this book. Like, the references to Naomi Klein, the references to David Harvey, the references, like, that's like, if you haven't read that, go get them. Go read them, because that's what's going to give us the instruments to equip us and equip our community to know what gentrification really is.
Hi, I'm Genesis. I'm actually a community organizer for We Act for Environmental Justice.
We Act lovers in the house.
For those who don't know, it's on 152nd Street in Amsterdam. But I have a question for Claudia. I met Claudia actually earlier. Well, not met her, but we spoke with her like earlier this week, and this was a question I wanted to ask you, but I guess I'll pose it to the rest of the group. As an organizer with the current political climate that we're in, and then I was born and raised in Inwood, and still have, I'm fortunate that I still live there. But with the rezoning and again with everything that's happening, I fear that I might be displaced, and worse, my mom, who is an immigrant. So my question is, as an organizer, there's so many things coming at you all the time. And as a person who's organizing people of color and communities of low income, it's sometimes hard to see those people here because they can't afford food. They're worried that they might get raided by ICE. There's so many different things attacking us at the same time that it's sometimes difficult to try to focus on something like a rezoning or housing or immigration. And the current political climate that we're in doesn't allow for that. So as an organizer, sorry I get really emotional. As an organizer, I'm just asking, like, how do we deal with that kind of stuff? And how do we make sure that we're still strong for the people that we're supporting and trying to get them involved? Because sometimes it's hard and there's no time, especially with this rezoning and Inwood. The public comment period is like next week. Yeah. There's people that still don't even understand what an ULURP is or what it means to do building codes. And I think that's been our biggest struggle here in Inwood and Washington Heights. You have a huge population of Spanish-speaking folks, and when you translate or interpret information, it's not the same in English. You have to adapt it not only through what it means, but culturally as well. And I feel like there's so many different factors that don't allow us to do that. So in everything that's happening now, I guess, how, as you as an organizer with so much experience, and even combining it with what's happening now, like, how do you go about that, or how will you help to address that, or have those conversations?
Damn, girl. For real. We could have done this week outside of this space. I mean, there's a lot of folks in the room that can speak to that, because I know and I see a lot of folks that have been doing organizing for, if not the same amount of time that I have, for longer. This isn't new. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not new. And resistance isn't new. Because as much as, like, oppression rises, so does resistance. And there will always be that, right? And I say that to say, right, we have a legacy of radical organizers and educators that we need to look to. Folks that are not here, folks that are here, and folks that will become that, right? So for every person that you speak to that doesn't have the time to do so, there's a young person that has the energy and the desire to do something. And so I think it's a matter of, like, again, as organizers, we're recruiters. We're recruiters for this movement, right? And so some people will turn down and not take the flyer. But that doesn't mean you stop getting the flyer. I'm a mom to a 3-year-old. You know how many times I gotta tell that little kid to quit doing shit? Like, the amounts of times that I gotta tell that little kid, Roque, you're not Spider-Man. Stop trying to climb. Oh, stop. But that doesn't mean that if he doesn't stop, right, I'll quit on him. I gotta keep telling him, right? So I think that the first thing that needs to happen with us is having something that in Spanish, I know that's how I learned. It's called convicción, right? Which a lot of people don't ever use in English. Conviction. It comes from the gut, from the dire need of having some shit change. And it doesn't mean only housing or healthcare or war. It means all of it. All of it, right? And not only here, internationally, right? And when you gain that consciousness and that conviction, then you can't stop. You get tired, and you go get a drink after work, or you hit up your homegirl and say, like, I'm tired of doing this work, and you find support in that space, because we need spaces of support as organizers, right? We need to, and even those spaces have diminished with this process of gentrification. There are in spaces like we had in the 90s or the late 80s or the early 2000s where organizers would come together and socialize and strategize and build cross issues. That is almost non-existent in New York City, right? So we need to create those spaces, whether it is at home, at church, whatever, Word Up, wherever there is a space, we need to occupy it in the sense of being there for each other. That is real. But we can't just get into our cocoons and think that we're the only ones that ever been through this shit. We're not. We're not. So we have to feel and be in relationship to the emotion, but we got to snap out of it and keep doing what we do. Because the other reality is that, and this is a whole different conversation, there's billions of dollars being made by an industry of self-help. We could talk about that or some other time, but I don't know if that speaks to you, and other folks may be able to speak to it, but I think that we don't have the luxury of giving up. Our generations to come don't have it. The generations that came before us didn't have it either. We can't give up.
And I'm also a psychotherapist, so I'm always telling my patients to mobilize your anger. Anger gets a really bad rap in this culture, in our American culture. Anger is a powerful emotion that drives us to make change and make things happen. I'm talking about righteous anger. And I know when I find myself lapsing into grief and into hopelessness, when I can come back around to anger, I'm energized again. So be angry.
And also on that point, I'm also a theologian, right? In liberation theology, there's a piece that's called Organizing the Hope of the Poor. A lot of the times as organizers, we focus on the lacks of the poor. And the dispossessed and poor people have a lot to teach us about organizing because they survive every day. I know my mom does. And so there's hope in that. And so how do we understand there's hope in that and organize that hope?
I'm an actress. I joined it in protest when the Cafe Edison in Midtown, which even Neil Simon used as the background for his play 45 Seconds from Broadway. It was called the Polish Tea Room. And we had sit-ins, and we had protests, and no matter what we did, it actually stayed shuttered for years, just like you were talking about, which through my knowledge, this organization knows that I'm not quite sure exactly how there's a tax abatement or whatever there is incentive for the landlords to keep the storefronts empty. But the Small Business Job Survival Act is something that is a huge thing that is part of this. And this is what, we have so many people that are in support of this, both people and council people and all that. Yet, we cannot get, isn't it true we can't get a meeting for it, to be at for what do they call it?
Yeah, it needs to be brought up for a vote.
For a vote, and the more, like it says, more power in numbers, and We've had, somebody went from the top of Broadway all the way down to the bottom of Broadway, the hugest street in the city, and they counted how many storefronts were empty. Unbelievable. I've lived 19 years in my apartment, and I mean, you will see an incredible, busy, wonderful community business one day, packed to the gills, and the next day, shuttered. So it has nothing whatsoever to do with, it has to do with the power of the landlords, which has absolutely, they have all the power. And they're being paid, they are supporting and paying all the representatives in the city. So that's something I feel very strongly about.
My name is Sandy Jimenez. I'm one of the sort of early volunteers who were brought up. And I just want to say, for everyone standing here, this is a prime example of how you fight gentrification. That's what this space does. The only reason this space is here is because in 2011, a young woman named Veronica Santiago, who was a book editor, decided there should be a bookstore. And she started talking to people about it. She basically went through the process that you were describing. She got like-minded people together. And that's really the only reason this place is here. It's volunteer run. So, everyone here should look at this place as a model for how you inject an organism into a neighborhood that's sick and make it healthy again. Because this is the best network, the best internet there is. It's the best technology there is. No book here that you pull out is ever going to run low on a battery. No Chomsky books are going to tell you that you don't have enough bars. And there's always going to be a person here to talk to. So for all of you here who are wondering what to do or feeling that panic that I've been feeling since I grew up here in the South Bronx about what to do, how do we answer this question about whose city is this? This is how you answer it. Maybe it's not a bookstore in your neighborhood, maybe it's a clinic, maybe it's something else, maybe it's an information center. But whatever it is that you need, make it happen. Don't look to somebody else to make it happen for you. That is not going to happen. That's in fact why we're in the situation we're in this city. This city represents probably the most amazing cultural experiment in history. How many people from how many different places can you get into a small square mile radius without having it erupt in a riot every single day, every single rush hour? Somehow we avoid not to do that. So if we can do that, we can certainly keep a nail salon and a fried chicken place from popping up every place where we need some cultural activity, where we need a political voice. And that's up to everyone in this room. So come back here, support this place. When they pass the can around, empty your pockets. This place is only here because you want it. It's your bookstore. There's no mandate by God or government that it exists. So thanks for coming out tonight and supporting Jeremiah, who's one of the best voices really for what's, I want to curse, what is absolutely wrong in this city and has been wrong for the last 15, 20 years. It's a scam. Don't buy it. Don't buy into this narrative that it's just the cyclical change that happens. We're getting robbed. There was a class war in this city, and the poor lost. So let's keep fighting. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you. I have a question. What, folks who are active and trying, what's working? What do you feel like you're doing that's working, that's getting through? Yeah.
There's one of Saturdays.
Okay.
Yeah, so I live in Harlem. It's crazy that I used to live like a block away on 152nd and St. Nicholas for the majority of my life, and then my grandma had to move out. Just really quick, like it was ingrained into me, like the importance of community at a very young age. It was like, if you don't know everybody who lives in your building and you live here more than 5 years, you're doing something wrong. If you don't know the person who's down the block every day, the person who's in the store, you're doing something wrong. So to hear gentrification be this like really old term, to me is really surprising, because until I started hearing it, did I have a name for the stuff that I saw, which to me was just the destruction of communities, right? Currently I'm working, so I'm part of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and we have a space in East Harlem. It's called the Justice Center in the Barrio. And we've been working against the rezoning in East Harlem, which was just passed in December. We went to these meetings on a regular basis, right? The community board meetings. where 90 to 95% of the people there were against the rezoning, right? We went to the city planning meetings, same thing, right? But it was still passed. So we decided to, they were proud of themselves because they had spoken to 1,400 people in a matter of 4 years. So what we did, we went on a couple of different blocks and we just stayed there and petitioned for about a month, and we spoke to 3,000 people. Well, we spoke more than 3,000 people. We got 3,000 signatures, people that were against rezoning. And we went to the city hall meeting and dropped the petitions of 3,000 signatures of people that live in East Harlem that do not want the rezoning, right? But their whole golden ticket was that it's going to bring more affordable housing. It's going to bring more affordable housing. It's going to bring more affordable housing, right? Nobody believed it. They don't talk to the people in the community because they didn't know what it was. But it's not even about like having to decode things. It's like, hey, did you know that they're trying to pass this and that? Oh yeah, because they're trying to kick us out. People know it's not. We don't have to find terminology. Is that they use the fancy words. They use it because then nobody else is going to understand it. We got to talk to people on a one-on-one basis. I appreciate the whole like saying door knocking because people don't talk to one another. That's like the really part, like the part that's missing. If we don't talk to one another, then it's gonna be too late. We're gonna get kicked out, right? I try to have conversations with everyone that's in my neighborhood, always, right? Even if it's like, if somebody in the corner store or if it's the local drug dealer. Like, there's somebody who lives in this community who's suffering, who has to find a way to make like some kind of money, right? So it's about getting off of like your moral kind of high horse and talking to everyone. And getting away from this like isolation that we live in within this city, because this city promotes isolation, right? Everywhere we go, we see these like advertisements for like seamless, how like oh, let's not talk to anyone, right? They're opening up stores where like there's no workers, because that's what it is. It's about separation of one another. Because that's the only way that they can succeed and pass these bills and literally move people from under, like remove people by doing it in secret. And it's time for like grassroots movements, because the people are done. The people have been done. Every year you see arguments come out saying that it's like record low voting. Every year, record low, right? We have elections, it's the record low of elections. Why? Because people are done. People understand that the person that ends up taking that seat is not going to represent them. So what they're worried about is themselves, right? So how am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to stay in my house? Right? You try to talk to someone about gentrification, like, oh no, don't worry, I'm handling it. They're not going to kick me out from my house. We gotta say these stories and talk and bring community together. Because in this space or in other spaces, we have to create those conversations. And like not only having an event like this and like putting it up on Facebook, but having an event like this and staying out for 3 hours and handing out flyers and talking to people about it. Because it doesn't matter, like if we have an event, if like the local people are not in these events, because then they're the ones at the end of the day are gonna have to fight, right? They're the ones that are gonna really have to fight for their community. And if they don't have that option, if they don't have that reality or that knowledge, then it's already too late.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Osadris. You can call me Osa. Some may know me, some may not. I have also been community organizing since a very young age of 13 under Claudia Cruz. I'm gonna be really quick because I keep hearing we need these spaces and these action steps. I'm also the other person of Save Uptown, if you've heard or see the stickers. So right now we are trying and we are doing an action call. We have come up with community chats every Saturday at DWDC 715 West 179th. If you want information, I have flyers. And what we're doing is door knocking. So we are going back to grassroots. Also myself, as at a very young age, I learned if you don't speak to your community, if you don't know anyone in your community, if you're not actually active in saying hello and knowing if the person is sick in your building. So when they fall in their home and you haven't seen them in a couple days, you actually know what's going on. So that was embedded in a very young age, and teaming up with Jessica, which was the co-founder of Save Uptown, I was able to bring that to the space, and now, obviously with guidance of so many mentors that I have around me, we have been able to basically hold space at DWDC. And this Saturday, we are going to be actually going out, like I said, door knocking. We want people to come out to the February 22nd to the community board meeting, and there's testifying that's going to happen that day. So that's what we're calling upon. And it's a privilege to be here. Let's acknowledge our privilege. That's why we're saying, oh, where is the community at? They're home, making dinner and probably working at the same exact time for their children. So let's meet them where they're at. Let's go knock on their doors. Let's stop being shy. I agree with my hermano right here. We don't talk to each other anymore, right? And then if someone doesn't speak the same language or they don't want to talk about it, we dismiss it. We're like, oh, we're not going to talk about this anymore because you have no understanding about what's going on in the world. No, it's a privilege to understand what's going on in the world because most people are trying to survive. So that is what I wanted to say. The action is happening, and it is with a lot of young people. Once again, we need to remember the ones on that wheel are going to be young people. I still consider myself youth, but at the end of the day, I'm also a mother at this point, and my son is 2. So you know what I'm going through if he's 2. So, you know, if you want more information, I have hella flyers in the back. If you know anyone that can come out, if you can give up 2 hours on a Saturday to just be on the Heights, please let me know. If you yourself, anyone wants to talk to you, please don't forget that I want to talk to you. And any other community organizer that's here and is wanting to become more active, please, let's talk. And that's where we're going to go. It's not about us coming here and just talking. If we don't network and we're like, hey, what are you doing? How can we support you? How can you feel better? I agree with Claudia. Like, we always have this conversation. Self-help is definitely making bucks right now. But at the end of the day, it's real. You got to take care of yourself. I understand you. I have been burnt out many times. But what reminds me is that if I don't continue to work, then my son isn't going to live in New York. I mean, not that I want to continue to live here. Honestly, I don't. But what happens to everyone else that can only afford to live here? What happens to that resistance? What happens to our resiliency? If you don't talk to your hermanas and not talk about just this work, then, hermana, you are going to continue to feel burnt out, but you're not alone. And I agree, don't stop doing the work. Se te ve la passion, desde que tú comenzaste a llorar. So that's what I wanted to say. Please don't forget, grab a flyer for me, come out if you can come and knock on doors with us on Saturday.
Hi, I'm a direct recipient of the generosity of Jeremiah's blog. I'm Dave Hunt from Coogan's Restaurant. Yay, great! Talking about different strategies tonight, I have to tell you what happened with us was a groundswell of community work. I see Arlene Shulman in the back there. Arlene was one of the people that started the whole Facebook campaign. So many other people joined in. This online petition was totally off the hook. I am internet. Believe me, I would not have done any of this. It was the very, very first petition I ever signed. I've signed a few since then. But it was the very, very first. But definitely, it was a community that came together. A community that we knew we were appreciated in the neighborhood, but certainly not on the level that we were. And to my Inwood friend, I'm a fairly educated person. I do not understand rezoning, but I know Inwood is strong because that's where my heart is. Thank you all. Thank you.
I want to say I'm from Inwood, but we're working on projects that cover Inwood and Washington Heights and Marble Hill and maybe even a little further south. And we're getting inspiration from East Harlem because you've gone through the rezoning. Yes, it passed, but you've had the strength to pull a lawsuit that legal aid is challenging it now in court. And we're reading that petition, and we find all the exact same conditions apply in Inwood. So we've already reached out to contact the legal aid lawyers. We hope to be talking to them soon. Another way we are inspired from East Harlem is, in East Harlem they've got a community land trust started. They actually are starting to take control of some buildings and land under them. The key there is community control of the land. So the gentrifiers, the speculators can't take it, and we can make it, instead of these temporary regulatory agreements where they run out and then the apartment's no longer affordable, we have 99-year renewable leases with solid land lease. So, and of course, you team up with a nonprofit developer. We're doing that in Inwood. Veronica here is part of that. We've got some flyers. We have a very informal open meeting, just about an hour up in, we're doing it in Inwood, Washington Heights, and Marble Hill, so it's going to cover the whole area. A little more of a focus lately in Inwood because of the rezoning, but we actually were out there today at Safety City where Council Member Levine had a press conference with Dale Brewer. Why can't the city give up that almost always empty, unused spot where you can put 200 affordable units, 100% permanently affordable? That potentially could go for a land trust so the community controls the land. So I can give out a few flyers so you can see where our meeting is going to be up at the LDS Church at Riverside Drive in Payson next Wednesday, 7. Just an informal hour, 7 to 8 o'clock. Learn more about us. I've also got some info sheets on us. But that's one tool. Now I'll finish my pitch and just throw it to you guys. What about the idea of communities taking control of the actual land? The land trusts like they do, especially in Cooper Square here in Burlington, Vermont, and other places.
I don't know a lot about it, but I keep hearing about it, and it seems like that's the place to go. But I can't speak to it because it's not something I don't understand. The zoning and ULERP, it's so hard to get your head around that stuff. But it's kind of like I keep hearing it buzzing around community land trust. So I feel like there's some hope there. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I think that, we need to think beyond of what we've been told is politically possible.
Yeah.
And get off the narrative of there isn't enough money or there isn't enough resources, because there are. It's a matter of priority. And so when we're talking about the ownership or control of community, that is totally possible in this city, in this state, in this nation. There's enough for everyone. And so I am in complete support of community land trust. And I think that, as communities, it's a matter of becoming more aware of what that is and what does that do for us as communities. And I feel like one of the things that I've been keeping everybody talking, and one of the things that I would like to see is how do we all kind of get into a room and start strategizing about making stuff happen. I'm gonna stop cursing.
Let's plan that.
Making things happen. Yeah. And I say that in the most genuine of the way, because sometimes there's a lot of internal politics and a lot of egos also that don't allow us to get things done. I was going to curse again, but I don't say things done. And I feel Dave, I didn't know you, but I knew Coogan's, and I know what it went in terms of the effort that it went for community to be able to keep it open. And like Coogan's, there's so many other restaurants in this community that are on the verge of being closed. And what are we doing about that? It's been proven it can be done.
The difference with Coogan's is Coogan's has a landlord, New York Presbyterian Hospital, who can be in fact embarrassed.
That's right.
There are other landlords who you cannot embarrass them.
But I'm sure that if we sit down and strategically think about ways in which we can hold space with those folks, things can change. Because I feel like a lot of the times what happens is that we allow people to vent for themselves. Oh, these folks are experiencing that, and you'll have 3 or 4 folks signing a petition or standing in support, but there's not a community support, even though we get their services, even though we're there, we somehow relate to them. So I'm just saying that what happened with Coogan's, it's a glimpse of what could be possible in the community. Landlords are landlords anyway. Whether it's Columbia, whether it's Yeshiva, whether they're landlords, and yet they don't want to be shamed, and yet they will make decisions on whatever benefits them, and that's what landlords do. So we just need to figure out what benefits them and tackle that shit. Sorry, I said I would.
Well, the part about the shaming is really important. And when we did the Cafe Edison, we had over 10,000 signatures on a petition. We had every weekend we had these lunchtime rallies, and we had hundreds of people going in there. We had Mayor de Blasio meeting with the owner of the building, and the owner of the building said, no, fuck you, like, no, it's not going to happen. So there's nothing there. And, you know, to your point about rethinking what's possible, commercial rent control, whenever I say commercial rent control to people, they're like, oh, that'll never happen in New York. You know, it happened. We had commercial rent control after World War II for almost 20 years. So, you know, things can happen, but we have to demand it. We have to make it happen.
And I also, again, to that point of like what's politically possible, I think it's also a matter of like thinking about a larger vision. Because a lot of the times we think of demands that politicians can meet, but don't solve the problem, right? So like, how do we say these are our demands that force for the system to actually change? That is possible, right? But it's only possible if we do it collectively. Not if everyone's kind of betting for themselves on their own personal or like political niches, right? So like, I think there's a lot of conversations to be had in terms of what strategy and tactics look like. And again, I want to say, how would that look with a room of folks that come from different experiences of organizing, of educating, folks that don't have any experience, and just being in conversation about what a larger vision for this city, for this state, for this nation looks like. With all the struggle that it means for us to actually speak to each other, because it's a struggle. But, you know, we need to at least be aligned conceptually to be able to make things happen concretely.
My name is Paloma. Hello. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question in Spanish and I don't need a translator. Okay. Viendo lo que dijo Génesis, yo voy al opuesto de eso completamente. Tal vez la gente piensa que yo soy mala o lo que sea, pero yo he ido a la calle, he hablado con muchas personas. Una de mis tácticas es que yo ni siquiera cojo el teléfono de la persona. O sea, para la forma que si yo quiero llegar a algo, que pase algo, yo tener que ir a visitar a esa persona frente a frente y tener esa conversación, ¿verdad? Como estamos hablando, que para que pase algo. Y ellos no se mueven, o sea, nadie se mueve, tenemos reuniones, tenemos actividades, les pedimos, les rogamos y ellos no salen a la calle, o sea, entonces yo creo que, yo no sé si soy yo, pero alguna vez es importante ya moverse de eso, que sí que tenemos problemas, que sí que la gente trabaja, y yo lo entiendo eso, claro, obviamente, pero ¿cuál es el problema? O sea, porque tiene que ser algo más que eso, porque lo que está pasando y lo que va a pasar, más que todo, a mí no me afecta tanto, porque en realidad yo tengo un buen trabajo. Sí, yo lo puedo perder algún día, bien, yo no voy a decir lo contrario, pero en realidad lo va a afectar a la gente que tienen el poco ingreso, a los latinos, a los dominicanos, lo que sea. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que no le está trayendo a ellos a la actividad? Porque no puede ser solamente esos problemas. O sea, no sé qué será, pero esta conversación se tiene que tener, porque no solamente soy yo que lo he dicho, porque algunas veces yo me he sentido bastante frustrada, porque nosotros no salimos a la calle, porque nosotros no atendemos las actividades que tenemos que tener, aunque hablamos con 100,000 otra gente y aunque lo está afectando tanto a ellos. Entonces, ¿qué diablo es?
La frustración, como dije anteriormente, la frustración siempre va a estar ahí. O sea, y de la convicción sale la necesidad de entender todo lo que aquí se dijo, en términos de la condición en que la gente vive. Porque la condición en que la gente vive, que es la condición misma de mi mamá, a la cual yo no le puedo pedir, mami, ven a una marcha, porque mi mamá se levanta a las 5 de la mañana para atender muchachos que no son de ella, y tiene los nietos también en la casa. O sea, esas son condiciones concretas que tú y yo no tenemos. En el sentido de que, como tú dijiste, tenemos un buen trabajo, y ellos han hecho sacrificio. Yo hablo del punto de mi mamá, de mi familia en particular. Han hecho un sacrificio para que yo no tenga que hacer eso, pero eso no quiere decir que yo me desclase y piense que yo no puedo en algún momento estar en la situación en que mi mamá estuvo y ha estado. Entonces yo tengo que pensar en la comunidad, como mi mamá, como mi abuela, como mi tía, como esa gente que no puede o no tiene, pero puedo terminar el punto. O sea, hay un proceso de enajenación que existe, que hay que entender, donde a nosotros se nos enseña a no hacer activos. Y es difícil activar a quien se le ha dicho que puede vivir de una manera fácil y puede conseguir las cosas fáciles. Entonces, hacer eso toma paciencia y viene de un espacio de amor. Tú tienes que amar mucho, pero mucho, y amar no en el sentido erótico, amar en el sentido de agape de la palabra, o sea, amar con la convicción de que aunque esta persona no me escuche, yo voy a hacer lo que yo tengo que hacer por mí, por ella, por nosotros. ¿Me entiendes? O sea que el punto organizativo no es tanto mover un cuerpo, es mover la mente y mover el corazón. Y para tú mover la mente y el corazón, tú tienes que ponerte no en el zapato, en la piel de la persona. Entonces, lo digo para decir que no importa en qué proceso organizativo tú estés, tú te vas a frustrar, tú vas a querer mentarle la madre a de gente, tú te vas a cansar, tú vas a querer buscar espacio de desahogo, tú vas a querer montarte en una montaña y gritarle al mundo que esta gente no se mueve. Pero quizás el problema no esté en la gente, sino en la táctica y en la estrategia que se está utilizando para querer movilizar. Si tú estás organizando una escuela con padres y madres, tú tienes que entender que quizás ellos no van a ir a una reunión a las 8:30 de la mañana después de haber dejado a los muchachos. Pero quizás vienen un sábado, si tú le ofreces desayuno, que no tengan que cocinarlo, si tú le ofreces cuidado de niños, y si tú vas al espacio donde están, no que ellos vengan donde tú estás. O sea, que son muchas, y esas tácticas van cambiando según la condición a la comunidad con la que tú estás organizando, pero nunca uno empieza de donde uno está, uno empieza de donde está la gente. Y esa es la única respuesta que yo te puedo dar en base a mi experiencia. Y de nuevo te digo, o sea, no es un proceso fácil, pero si tú asumes que tú eres un educador porque todo organizador tiene que ser un educador o una educadora. Entonces, si tú eres eso, dentro de tu convicción, tú tienes que, si no funciona esto, vamos a buscar esto. No funciona esto, vamos a buscar. Y siempre estás reinventando cómo es que lo vas a hacer. Pero si uno se frustra y deja que la frustración, entonces no hay cambio. No hay cambio. Y de nuevo, la conversación con otras personas que están en el mismo proceso es importante. Porque si uno no conversa con personas que están en el mismo proceso, uno no encuentra salida. Y eso también es diseñado. Se diseña, nada más hay que ver los apartamentos como están hechos. Cómo están hechos los edificios aquí. Donde pasa cualquier cosa en el edificio, en la parte de arriba, y se pueden estar matando allá arriba y yo no voy a averiguar qué es lo que está pasando por miedo. O sea, en ese contexto en que vivimos, la gente no se habla. So basically what I was sharing is that in the process of organizing, we also need to be educators. And we need to work from a space of love, like not the notion of like erotic love, but the agape type of love, the type of love that is for all humanity and creation, that moves us beyond our frustration. Like we will be frustrated. We will jump to the highest like mountain and say, these people don't move, like, you know. But as organizers and as educators and as people who love humanity and creation so much, what we are called to do is to change tactics that could take us to where the strategy is supposed to lead us. And blaming the poor for their condition is not the route. Like understanding the condition and having the clarity in conversations with others about needing to change what needs to change to move minds and hearts before we mobilize people. Because a lot of the times we mobilize people and people don't even know why they're there. But moving the minds and the hearts of people in a way that they understand and become conscious, active participants of the process of building social movement is necessary. Your sister right here. I don't know your name.
It's okay. So I just feel like there is a piece missing from the conversation. And I think that's because it's been constructed in a very binary way. I'm inspired by a lot of what I hear, but I feel like the part that's maybe being overlooked is that there is a
in this very large city, in this very diverse city, there's also a persuadable middle. And there is a target that is not, you know, it's not anti on one hand and pro on the other. There's a very gray area in which people's minds can be turned around, even though they may already be acting in ways that are contrary to what we think. I mean, I come from a background where parents were in the labor movement very early on, and there was a coalition building. It wouldn't have survived otherwise, right? So, I mean, that's part of American history too, and I know you talked about that. You talked about the neighborhoods up here. I mean, there was an active leadership role which brought together very disparate and very ethnically diverse groups and joined forces. And it wasn't always successful to talk about it in terms of an absolute belief that you wanted the other side to come to. So for example, and I use this example because it also reminded me of something very binary that you mentioned when you talked about homosexuals in terms of gentrification. That, you know, the Giuliani administration was discriminatory. Well, there are just as many homosexuals who are in the gentrifying side of things, right? So we can't really just break it down into black, white, gay, straight, all the time. There has to be a way to fluidize the conversation, make the dialogue more, hey, this is about you too and who you are as a human being. And you may be an atheist, but I can bring you over. And maybe it doesn't, maybe the capitalism versus socialism model isn't going to work in persuading some people. So if you go in and say, hey, you know, the only answer here is to socialize this country, you're not going to get them to your side. You know, let's dismantle capitalism. Hey, you know, I think that at least once a day, but I know it's not going to work with a lot of people. So can I still get those people into the conversation? Can I still get them to look at what's happening with gentrification? I feel like I want to hear more about that.
There's thank you for that. There's a really good book by George Monbiot that just came out like a few months ago, and I can't remember the title. His last name is Monbiot, and he talks about I really like how he talks about stories driving politics, and he talks about how in the early part of the 20th century there was the socialism story, and that was taken over by the neoliberalism story in the late 70s and the 1980s. And what he says is that we can't, in his opinion, we can't go back to the socialism story. We need a new story. And part of what he talks about as a new story is about like community land trusts and this sort of collectivism. And he lays it out really nicely. And I think the book is called How Do We Get Out of This Mess, or Getting Out of the Mess or something. But if you look it up online for his latest book, he really does a nice job with it. So I think that him and Naomi Klein also, who's Canadian, in Canada, they're working with a lot of Indigenous Canadian folks and other people across Canada to come up with this. They have this mission statement where they also talk about sort of a new story and where to go next. That is not about going backwards, but going forward. So there are people who are working on this and doing some interesting thinking. But the George Monbiot is the author, and I think it's like, how do we get out of this mess, or something about this mess. I'm sorry, I can't remember the title. Out of the Wreckage. There, mass wreckage.
Somebody was
Thank
Googling
you.
it.
Out of the Wreckage. Thank you.
And I just want to share, I mean, you're completely right in terms of the folks that are in the middle, and in terms of like even strategy, right? Like we want to be able to move the folks that are in the middle, right? Understanding middle class, middle like ideology, like we want to be able to move them to the right side of history, right? I mean, yeah, it might, I mean, I say it's the left for me, like I know that is for me, but I think that there's a lot of folks that say, you know, socialism and don't really know what socialism is, right? So like, I think that, I know what it is for me, right? So I think that the conversation around these large concepts are necessary. Understanding what are we really talking about. And even coming up with new language is necessary, right? Like I think that one of the things that and that doesn't mean like disregarding theory, because, you know, I know what I am politically, and I could identify myself here and say like, I believe in Marxist-Leninism. Like that's what I believe in, right? And I believe it theoretically, historically. That's what I believe in. But that doesn't mean that everybody that I talk to needs to, claim that. That's not, and not that everybody that I work with needs to be that, right? But at least we need to conceptually be in agreement about what is right and what is wrong. For humanity, for creation, people over profit, right? And we could start there and move to a certain point. But I feel like if the dialogues aren't open enough and we adhere to like conventional and old ways, orthodox ways of relating to each other, it ain't gonna die. We're not gonna make this happen. I agree with you. I think that there needs to be language that we need to have a new imagination for the future. How do things actually look in the context in which we are today? Not 20, 50, 60 years ago. Like, we can't continue to use the same language when we have the internet, social media. Like, we need to invent new things, and we need to look back, do like the Sankofa bird and kind of look back for reference, but move in the context in which we are.
Expand on what you said, because look, if we look at the greater context. So you talked about the Lower East Side. I work in the Lower East Side, right? So obviously one of the biggest developments going right now is the whole Essex crossing on Essex and Delancey. And the reality is, as much as we complain about these big box stores coming into neighborhoods and making us look like another, like a big mall, the reality is that a lot of everyday people in the LES were like, you know what, I want a Trader Joe's because it's a food desert. I wouldn't mind having a Target because I don't want to take the train to Brooklyn to go to the Target there. We lost our movie theater in Essex, so it's kind of nice that I'm getting this movie theater back. And the reality is that as much as we're lamenting the landmark Sunshine, a lot of LES residents don't go to the landmark Sunshine. That's just, I think we have to kind of keep a lot of that into perspective, is that sometimes the image, in fact, of like the people who are against development is it's mostly like middle class, educated people that are always exposed, that are always against these projects, usually saying it, ruins the character of the neighborhood. And it's just these are these things that you do have to think about when you're looking at, because the majority of the families I work with actually live in public housing. And they're not thinking about these things. Like you said, they're trying to survive. They got ACS sometimes when investigating them. They're more worried about that than like, oh yeah, this stuff is coming in. Okay. But so it's just what I'm saying is sometimes we really have to rethink. Like you talked about the Community Land Trust, and I learned a couple of weeks ago that Cooper Square was the first one. But in some ways, I have to say this, but every time I walk through Alphabet City, I'm like, you guys have all these wonderful affordable housing programs. Mutual housing, LES, CHD, Section 8, Mitchell Lama, HDFCs, and all of these things, but guess what? I think that actually these programs were a victim of its own success, because as they stabilized the neighborhood, it hypergentrified all the development. Now I'm walking on Houston and D, and I'm like, what is this? What is this luxury tower doing over here on Houston and D that people are paying $3,000 a month? And I bet a third of it is being full. In fact, the only people filling it up are the affordable housing, or the people who went into the housing lottery. So it's really we need to kind of look at all of these things in blend. That we're having this conversation because we're still in the end more privileged than a lot of other people.
I grew up in the Lower East Side, and I moved to Washington Heights recently, about 5-6 years ago. And Extra Street Market is super important to the Latino community.
I definitely agree.
And
it is.
That's where we shopped.
Yes.
And I mean, it's changed completely. So at this point, it doesn't matter that it's not going to be there, because they started bringing in I don't know what the fuck. But it wasn't a food desert because we had Extra Street Market.
Yeah, I agree.
And people shop there. And we have bodegas.
Right.
And back in Grand Street, there was a Pathmark. And so I don't know about the movie theater. I guess Latinos and Puerto Ricans probably didn't go there. But there are a lot of important things to us in that that are important. So an extra street market is definitely one of them.
Oh no, it's a cornerstone within the community, you know. And then there's some debates about like how to go from La Marqueta to this gourmet market now, which is what some people view it as. And it's it is a really wonderful. I agree, it's a wonderful market. I mean, there are some good things that I saw from Essex at the Essex Crossing. What they've done is, I don't think there's enough affordable housing in the development. You know, when I look, I was like, really? That's it? Really? And there's like 10,000 people going into this lottery. But I do appreciate the fact that they brought in a lot of nonprofits to kind of develop jobs, you know, to actually work on the construction. And I do appreciate the fact that Essex Market is working with the community and saying, well, what's your vision? You know, we want to do cooking workshops. It's great that they do cooking workshops, but these are the kinds of conversations.
My mom goes there every day.
I'm sorry, y'all. We're trying to have like more of a communal situation happening as a Lower East Side conversation happening in the back, but and it's cool. No, and it's cool, and we'll continue to have those conversations. We're trying to actually wrap up in the next 6 minutes so that folks have the opportunity to exchange with each other. And I still have two hands to that, you know.
I wanted to, and I know you just said probably not to do this, but I think to bring this conversation back to what I heard about the book is that, okay, so maybe communities do like the target that ended up on the Lower East Side, but I think what's happening is communities aren't being asked, and the corporations are coming into communities, and this is what I hear, and what has been a frustration for me, and that neighborhoods are changing without the people who live there having a say. And that's what's really, I think, at the heart of what I hear people say, and I think we need to be very careful. Yes, maybe people like bike paths, but why are they coming in, and is it something that the community is prepared to take on? So I hear what is being said, and I just keep thinking, well, but that's okay, so that's a byproduct, but that's not democracy, that's not about the people that already live there, that's about these corporations coming in and taking over our spaces, and I think what we want to do is own them, and that's not an example of ownership, and I hope, I wanted to, as I heard that's what I heard you think.
Well, I may be one of the few people here who doesn't have a soapbox. But I do find that in order to believe somebody and trust somebody, I really want to know their story, as you mentioned people's stories. So Jeremiah, briefly, what is your story? Where did you come from, and when did you come here?
Basically,
my whole life story. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
What's your street cred, bro? Yeah, what's your street cred, bro? Street cred. We want to know where you coming from.
Why you care so much?
What is my story? I came here in 1993. I come from a small working class town in Massachusetts. I'm Italian, Irish Catholic.
What's happening there?
What's happening there?
That you are fighting for?
My hometown?
Your hometown.
I try to avoid that place as much as possible. So I came to New York.
What we should do.
Yeah.
And what we should care about.
You want me to go back there and?
No, I'm just.
They all are like Trump supporters. I'm not going back there.
I think there's something very good. I mean, let me just say this much. I started reading the book. I'm gonna confess myself, and I was like, "Who is this guy?" And why is he talking about gentrification when most gentrifiers look like him? But it's true. Am I lying?
It's these glasses, right? Yeah, I know. All right.
And then I dove digger into it, and I understood why he was talking about it. Because even as we talk about, like, a lot of us use the word colonialism, right? Like, colonialism and gentrification are off the same coin, two sides. And so, like, displacement of native indigenous folks, like those are the natives of this nation, right? All of us sitting here are immigrants, whether we want it or not. And so when we talk about New York City, when we talk about the different states of this great nation, we're talking about a nation composed of immigrants from somewhere, unless we're talking about native indigenous nations. And that's true. And for us to be able to understand gentrification, the aspect of class, to me was like, you hit it on the nail, because there are a lot of Black and Latino folks that are very bougie.
Exactly, it's true.
That are the essence, like they are the embodiments of what capitalism is. And do have economic and political power. But sometimes we just touch our hearts and we're like, they can't be gentrifiers, but they are. And so I think, like, again, to speak to who you are and where you come from, like the aspect of having been from a working class community, like a lot of us who migrate from our communities, who have been like, who have come into this big nation following the traces of what has been robbed from us because of imperialism, because of neoliberalism. Like, there is no way in hell that I can see this man and say, you don't belong. Especially with the contribution, like I really do think that the book is a contribution and worth study. Like, if you ever get into a space of study circles, which I promote highly, buy the book and talk about it. And talk about it in relations to migration. Not only across state lines, but across the seas, you know? Go back to the story of the Shab doctrine that Naomi Klein writes about. Because there's a copy and paste system that was created and tested outside of the United States. And guess what? Chickens came back home to roost. When you spoke about poisoning water, you hardly ever thought of Flint, Michigan, right? You thought about some third world country. Well, you know what? The same enemy. It's called capitalism. Check that out. And so again, I feel like, yeah, I was trying to figure out your script strat, like, but you know, you're a regular schmegular Joe, like me. Right here.
I would actually say, just to look in this conversation, that if you do buy the book, which is an incredible read, in your first chapter you do give your narrative about why you care so much.
Yeah.
So if you do want to read a little bit more about it, it's here. Very transparent.
That's a great pitch.
I just want to say, I'm a strong believer that your dollar is your vote, right? So don't stop going to Starbucks. Stop ordering from Amazon. Stop ordering from restaurants. Go to your local stores. You know, spend your money with somebody who lives in your community. You know, buy the book and word up. Don't buy it on Amazon. That's what I believe.
Since the subject of public housing was brought up, I have a question for you, Jeremiah, as to where you think the future of public housing will be. As we all know, there are so many hardworking families who live there. People who want to, some want to get in, some want to get out. But looking at the Dykeman houses, for example, in Inwood, a very low crime rate. I know about ECS, but what I'm curious about is how do you adjust the rents there? What do you do with public housing when the rest of the community is changing around it? And conceivably, people who live in public housing will not be able to afford the services in their own community.
The future of public, I don't know that I'm equipped really to answer that question, but I go to two associations that I'll share. One is there was a really interesting study that the city did of people in public housing in Chelsea and a couple other neighborhoods and how they were experiencing gentrification in their neighborhood. And a lot of folks are saying that they welcomed the sort of safer streets, but that they felt this alienation, right? So which brings me, I'm kind of going off your question a little bit, but the idea of displacement. When we talk about displacement, there's also cultural displacement, there's also spiritual displacement. So people who are still in their homes, maybe they're in public housing or they have rent control, there's still a sense of not belonging anymore, and that's what's happening around a lot of the public housing that's in gentrifying neighborhoods. That people have nowhere to shop, people have nowhere to go out to eat. Like everything's gone, and there's a sense of alienation. I mean, the other thing that's happening to public housing is that they're putting these market rate towers on the open spaces in the middle of these buildings. It's just, I mean, that is like neoliberalism writ large. And to imagine what that is going to be like for people, to have the sun blotted out and your garden blotted out and your playground blotted out by these towers that are going in. And that was a Bloomberg scheme, and de Blasio is not stopping it. I mean, it's going forward, is the last I heard. So, I don't know. That's where I go with that. I don't think I answered the question, but...
I think that there will be space for folks that are doing work around housing probably to engage in that conversation. I don't know how much I can thank y'all for being part of this conversation, and Jeremiah for being the regular schmegular. So, if you, which I hope you do, purchase the book, look at the references. Like, read the book, but definitely look at the references, because I think a lot of what the analysis that is drawn from the book, it's important to know who these resources are, because these are folks that most of us who are doing a lot of organizing work a lot of the times don't look to, and these folks have an analysis that we need. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.